Howdy all of you delicious people, I'm here today to review Season 1, Episode 4 of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, going into this episode, really, still enjoying this show. This episode was fairly simple, and I'm kind of starting to get annoyed at how most of this show has to really be held upon rescuing Leia, being with Leia, and... it's just become the whole season. And I'm like, man, I wish that we could have gone on and, possibly done, some flashback stuff with, of course, Vader before he was actually Vader. That would have been nice. Or really just kind of given us something within this episode to add in eventual characters somewhere down the road. But it feels like we are at one point when Obi-Wan Kenobi is walking down this hallway into this tomb of sorts. He is to go on and spot a number of characters that may at some point hopefully be added into the show at some point, or eventually we might have to have flashbacks of certain characters. Because it seems that Obi-Wan is to have referenced a certain Jedi from a previous episode that we might have at some point seen within this same location of people being imprisoned. So, going on into this episode, it's a very simple enough episode. It's another rescue Leia episode, where we, of course, are two from the last episode. I didn't know exactly what this spot was, but now that I do know what it is, we have to break into the Fortress Inquisitors and try to rescue Leia yet again. And so, while that's going on, we have, of course, Reva wanting to torture a little kid, Leia, for information. And we go on to also have Tala and Obi-Wan trying to break into this fortress to try to rescue Leia, as well as us adding in certain things of which that we've seen in past Star Wars movies, or we really much more add a lot of stuff within this episode that were incorporated in a lot of the games. Like when I went on and researched certain pieces, because I'm like, okay, what is this? What is this piece? I went on and I just saw certain visuals of from video games and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, okay, so this is more prominently used in certain video games and stuff like that, and there's certain characters that I think are much more used in video games, like the Purge Troopers, the kind of more black looking characters and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I've never seen that before, or I probably would have, but it's Star Wars, you get confused. So anyways, with that said, let's go into really just say that this show is really interesting. I really like it. Some people may go on and say that this may be too slow for them or whatever, or a lot of people might not like how this is going. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about the show. I think the show works, and so with that said, a lot of episodes also just kind of feel like the other Star Wars films in a lot of ways. But heaven forbid you have really complex Star Wars writing, because I wouldn't want that anyways, because frickin' Boba Fett was a thing. And we have all the references and all the Easter eggs and all the garbage that they just spewed out of all that. No offense to Boba Fett. There's a lot of cool things about that show. It was just man, I have to just feel that I know everything, and I just don't want to. I just don't want to know that much in depth about Star Wars, because I have to go on and review other things, and it just became such an exhaustion thing going on, and having to really buckle down and like, yeah, this droid and that droid and this one and that one and like little things in the background, and I'm like, I don't really care anymore. Because when it ends up being that it like nobody's gonna really uh like really care about a Star Wars thing, it's just kind of sad. So anyways, with that said, let's go into that double five time territory. This episode is simple enough. Let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode. So, in the very beginning of this episode, we have Kenobi that is to be taken from the ship and is to be hauled away via stretcher. We, of course, have Ned B, the loading droid that is kind of watching on as Kenobi is getting hauled away. So we have, of course, Kenobi who gets plopped into this Bacta tank. And I'm like, man, we have to just heavily use that Bacta tank. Like, man, after the Boba Fett, it's like, we got to keep going to this. So we have Kenobi who, of course, gets flashbacks because, of course, we always have to have these characters that might have side effects of just flashbacking. But we're showing both Vader and both Kenobi both in these Bacta tanks. Or Bacta tanks? I'm probably ill-pronouncing that. And so eventually we have it at one point where finally Kenobi is to wake up from this tank, and we have Talia that is telling him, it's like, well, hey, like, your wounds haven't healed, like, quite yet. Like, just kind of relax. So, but we go on and we have Kenobi that is ever so stubborn, and so he wants to go on and, of course, try to save Leia. So, we of course have it where we have a guy named Roken who is to kind of be like the leader of this, like I would want to call it a rebel alliance, just because really, is there any other like thing that you can call this? So we have like this rebel alliance base, this kind of hidden area. So we go on and we have this plan where it seems that Leia is being held on this planet called Nerd, and this is to be a heavily water planet, and so we go on and we have them tell us that the Fortress Inquisitor is where Leia is being held, and so we go on and we just have it to where Obi-Wan is just like, well, why don't you just send a couple of speeders and we can just kind of make it in there. We can just kind of sneak in there. And Roken's like, no, like, it doesn't work that way. Like, it's not as easily as it seems. Like, this place is, like, heavily guarded and everything like that. And so, like, we have it to where the plan is that Kenobi is going to try to sneak in. So, we have it to where, of course, Leia is talking to Reva, and so Reva is going on and bringing up the fact that they were to go on and find this Jedi temple symbol within the place that Leia was hiding out in, and that, of course, Reva wants to know what Leia knows about, of course, like the information that Tala had, or possibly where Kenobi is being held. So we go on and we have Reva, who is trying to use her force power to get the information out of Leia, is going on and like trying to interrogate her, and nothing is really working. And so we have it at one point where Leia is to turn on her little droid Lola and hopefully figure out a way to have Lola go on and possibly like rescue her or something. But Reva is to spot Lola, is to take this droid, is to reconfigure the droid to then later on, by the end of the episode, have Lola somehow be a tracker for the Empire so they can eventually locate exactly where these people are. So we have it at one point where Reva is to mention how she at one point used to have a little droid, but that was all taken from her. And so Reva is to go on and give this droid back to Leia. And so they are to go on and eventually just take Leia into this interrogation chamber, and so that way they can go on and get information out of her. So while that's all going on, we have Tala that is to make her way to this fortress with this Imperial shuttle, and so she ends up landing. She ends up going into hoping that her clearance is still going to work for her. And so she ends up having to hand off this code cylinder to one of these other men, and this Imperial guard of sorts. No, it's a security guard. It's a Fortress Inquisitor security guard. And so we go on and we have the security guard that's asking Talia, like, well, hey, like, aren't you in, like, the wrong, like, region? Aren't you at the wrong location? And Talia is like, well, my access is classified, so, like, she's basically just intimidating this guy to let her through, and so he lets her through because basically all these guys, like, if you argue with them enough, they'll just let you go because they're just that weak. So Tala goes through, makes her way further into the fortress to get to one of these terminals while having this communication device with Obi-Wan. So we go on and we have Obi-Wan that is to be swimming while using his breather device, or his breather that he was to go on and use, like in Phantom Menace with Qui-Gon, where they're kind of swimming to get to Jar Jar Binks people to try to negotiate with them to, like, put a treaty together so they can go on and work with Padme, so they can go on. And so yeah, like, we have Kenobi that's swimming his way using this breather. So we have Kenobi making it into this spot where he is to have to take down this stormtrooper. And so Kenobi, I would have thought, would have gone on and just, like, put on that stormtrooper outfit so that way he can go through there incognito and not have to go on and, like, sneak his way all the way through. Because I'm like, man, like, this is probably a very high security place. Like, you go on, you have these, like, seeker droids or these probe droids that are kind of going through and, like, scanning everything. So we go on and we have Obi-Wan who is going through this one hallway, and he is to realize that some stormtroopers are also going through the opposite way. So Kenobi hides himself and is to go on and have Tala calling him on his communicator. And so Obi-Wan kind of uses this force power so that way to make a little knock. So the stormtroopers like, hey, what's that noise? And so they go off. So we have it to where, like, Talia is telling Obi-Wan where to go within this area to find out where Leia is. And we have one of these terminal officers that's telling Talia, like, well, hey, wait a minute, like this isn't where you work. Like, why are you here? So the Terminator, the terminal officer is to grab Talia and to take her. So while Leia is going into this interrogation chamber to eventually be tortured horrifically, we, of course, go on and have Obi-Wan that is to try and tell Tala that she has to go on and eventually create some kind of distraction. So Tala is to go on when she's grabbed by these stormtroopers after the terminal officer is to have Tala be taken by these stormtroopers. Tala gets away from them, blasts them, and then is to go on and try to create this distraction by taking this officer and telling this girl to come to this room so that way Tala can go on and tell Reva that Reva was to be supposedly undercover and is telling Reva about all the stuff that she was to be a part of when she was on Mapuzo and what was going on there. So Reva, of course, while creating this distraction, we had Obi-Wan who is making his way to Leia to the interrogation chamber, and while he was going to that location, he all of a sudden is to spot a massive hallway with a bunch of Jedis who are all in these like kind of tomb-like things. They're kind of like it's not like they're in carbonite, but they're like in this kind of very like they're fossilized. Like if you were to go on and see like Jurassic Park, and you would see the moment when they would take the blood from that one bug. Like it feels like all these Jedis are weirdly just fossilized, and like they're like encased in like this kind of honey-colored like prison to where they're just kind of frozen there. So, and a lot of people would go on and have a lot of Easter eggs thinking that, oh, these characters are this and this character is that, this character is so and so Jedi, and so on and so forth. And eventually, a lot of people, I think, quickly made the conclusion that Mace Windu is probably one of those guys. I would love to hope that. But I had this back and forth about it. And I know everyone is to go on and say that, like, oh, Mace Windu's dead. Like, you can't unring that bell. He's already dead. I just want some of that Mace. Like, is that so wrong that I just want to see Mace Windu again? Because it's prequel. Like, he should still be alive. But that's asking a lot also from the show. So anyways, we go on, and so within this show, we have Kenobi that is to make it to this chamber. He's to turn out this power, and is to slice up these stormtroopers. Like, regardless of how, like, the hits might have not looked all that great, like, still, it was kind of cool that, like, Kenobi was murdering some stormtroopers, slicing and dicing them up. So Kenobi goes on and is to go on and rescue Leia here. And so now we, of course, go on and have it to where Reva is talking to Talia and thinking that Talia is just a liar, and that Reva can't really trust what Talia is really saying here. So all of a sudden, alarms are to be sounded, and because one of the seeker droids, or one of the probe droids, end up noticing that that Kenobi is in the hallways, and so alarm starts to go off. So we have it, of course, where Darth Vader is to, of course, be very upset with Reva, but we'll get there. So we go on, and while Reva is to see what that alarm is, completely forgetting about Talia, Talia is to go on and run off and re-meet up with Kenobi, And so now we have the goofiest thing ever, but I think a lot of people would probably say this anyways. We have it to where Kenobi is in this little trench coat disguised, and like we can obviously see that there's 4 feet like in this trench coat, but with how poor like eyesight is for any stormtrooper, how would they notice this anyways? They can't even fire guns accurately, and anyone who is to go on and put on that stormtrooper outfit would go on and say, yeah, I can't see a freaking thing in that thing, in that helmet. Like it's so cumbersome. Like we had the guy, the one guy from episodes 7, 8, and 9, who is to be like the stormtrooper in that. The guy from I want to say it's like Ortega or something like that. The one he mentioned like how badly he couldn't see through that helmet. And just imagine how like anybody else would have to go on and put on that helmet like I can't see a freaking thing. Maybe it's not Ortega. The one guy who was the stormtrooper and then was dubbed a traitor. That guy. Anyways, pushing on. So we have Kenobi with Leia, and we had the one cool part also before the whole trench coat thing, where Kenobi was in this hallway just fighting off with these lightsabers, or with this lightsaber, trying to reflect these blasts coming through. And one blast ends up making it into cracking this glass. And so now Obi-Wan is going on and using his force ability to keep this glass from breaking. So that way these troopers would go further and further into this room. And then Kenobi could fill this whole room with water, leaving Kenobi to run off. And gotta say, I'm like, in my brain, I'm thinking that Kenobi's force power is not that good. And, like, now he has to go on and do this kind of force, like, protection block kind of thing on this glass. I'm like, I don't think that his powers is all that reliable right now. But I guess when push comes to shove, like, again, we have it to where the force is always this safety blanket, so to speak. So Kenobi runs off, and this door, of course, is to close. And now we just see, like, a bunch of just stormtroopers just floating. They're all dead now within this room because they had drowned. So that's when we, of course, get Kenobi, Leia in that trench coat together with Tala running off. So we go on, and I'm like, where's Vader during this whole time? If he knows that Kenobi's in this spot, you would think he'd be running around like a madman, getting to Kenobi, wanting to see him off. But anyways, we go on, and we have it to where now Tala and Kenobi, with Leia in this trench coat, are turning around to now have Reva there looking at them dead in their eye, and or just kind of looking at them eye to eye, and is basically having a number of troopers there, and it's like, yeah, you aren't going to get out of here. Like, come on, you're way outnumbered. There's no way you're gonna be able to get away. All of a sudden, we have these two air troopers, or air speeders, I mean, that come in and start blasting through and killing all these troopers. And so we go on and, of course, have Kenobi and Tala going into, I believe, Sully's ship. And we have Wade that's kind of going on and trying to provide cover fire while, like, these characters are getting into this ship. So come to find out, we have Reva, who is to take this equipment and toss it into the air and explode Wade's ship, as we're thinking that both of them are getting out of there, and Wade dies. And so now we have to go on and mourn for a character that we didn't really care about. And it's like, oh, Wade's dead? Whoever Wade was. Whoever I had to care about Wade for. Okay, sure. So we have Sully that goes on and is with Kenobi, Tala, and Leia on to this rebel ship. Because I'm assuming it's possibly just a transport. Let me know in the comments below what that ship actually was. Because every time I looked for it, I'm like, I don't know if this was the ship or not. I don't know if I'm going to say that this is correctly. So, rebel ship, yeah. So, we go on and we have Kenobi and all of them getting into the ship, and then Roken is meeting with them, and it's like, where's Wade? And it's like, oh, well, Wade's dead. We're not going to tell you that, but we're going to just look very sad. And then Roken's like, oh, like, well, I guess he's dead then. So they all get into the ship. They're all just relaxing, chilling, all cool. And so we now have it to where Darth Vader is ticked at Reva and is kind of force choking her. While he's giving her the James Earl Jones, if you know what I'm saying. Some of that James Earl. So we of course have Darth Vader that is going on choking Reva. And so Reva is just telling him, it's like, well, I have a tracker on that device, or I'm going to have a tracker that's going to track where Leia is. And then we end up going and finding out that Lola is to have this red dot on her, making us realize, like, oh, like, Reva was to figure out how to manipulate the Lola droid and figure out how to now place this as a tracker. Ooh, wow. So that's just how this episode is to, of course, end. I think I'm going to try to rush to get out of here so I can go on and hopefully forget that I probably forgot a bajillion million things upon this episode, because I'm sure that I did, because I rushed through it. So with that said, let me know in the comments below if there's something in much more specifics that I can go on and have probably said through this review, because that would be great to eventually get comments and whatever. Really, I think there were some times where in that tomb-like location, there were certain Jedis that, of course, were to more be referenced within the animated series through that, because some of them did technically look familiar. But again, you would probably have to go through more of an Easter egg thing than my review, because I probably just kind of rushed through a lot of things, even though look at the Boba Fett review and I say too much. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.